Welcome back to the DemystifySci podcast. Today we have our first conversation about the phenomenon. We have with us Dr. Massimo Teodorani, an Italian astrophysicist who is involved in Avi Loeb's Galileo project and is trying to take high-resolution spectroscopic images of inexplicable phenomena in order to tell what is happening. The idea is pretty simple. If you could take a spectroscopic image of an unidentified object, you might be able to discover what the mode of propulsion might be. Many people have reported strange electromagnetic disturbances in the vicinity of these phenomena, and he's basically proposed that if you can take a sufficiently high-resolution picture, you'd be able to see line splitting of ionized gases in the atmosphere. So oxygen would normally have a single spectroscopic line. In the presence of a very, very strong magnetic field, it would divide and you would have two. And that would give us insight onto these very irreproducible and difficult to study events. And our conversation talks about the Galileo project. We talk about the nature of inquiry. We talk about music. We talk about where ideas come from. We cover a lot of ground because Dr. Teodorani he's kind of a Renaissance man. He has a lot of different subjects that he's interested in. He's willing to go to the very edge of science and speculate to what lies beyond what we know, and that is basically our bread and butter.
Yeah, I really like how careful he is, and he's always prefacing his statements with, this is a speculation, and he's good about separating out what are observations from what are theories, and yeah, he's just a really thoughtful dude, and I think you guys are going to love it. And it's also our first time cracking open this UAP subject, and honestly, it kind of reinforces what we were thinking already, but that's cool too. So there's a whole information layer to society, and there is manipulation of that information layer. Everybody's clearly aware of that after the events the last couple of years, at least out here in the West. And so, yeah, this plays directly into that conversation too.
If you like what we do, leave a comment, come to our Discord.
Share it with people. That's how we get the word out. The algorithms aren't going to feed this to people unless you guys do. So, for
whatever reason, if anybody is working at YouTube and watching this, can you help us figure out what's going on with the algorithm? We would really appreciate that. If you have already shared it and you want to help us more, you can come join our Patreon. We are building a community of people who are interested in building something with us.
And our direct advisors, essentially, right? This is something of a community project in that we don't have time to be out there digging through the internet and finding all of the cool things that need to be explored. We have some time for that, but you guys can really get involved and come out to our weekly chats and power this machine.
And so enjoy the conversation, and we will see you soon.
The scientific revolution starts now.
The DemystifySci podcast.
Let us see in the dark.
I've been working, of course, a lot in the astrophysical research on explosive objects like supernovae, novae, and high mass close binary stars, protostars, all what is exploding in the universe. So that has been my field for many years. But in parallel, the Mr. Hyde that is in me, I wanted to co-live with Dr. Jekyll. And I started to think that it would be interesting to know what an astrophysicist could do with his methodology in order to try to take measurements of a strange phenomenon that is seen in the sky after clearly eliminating all the sources of noise, hoaxes, so many, known phenomena. I don't speak about that because 90% of this kind of phenomenon can be very easily explained like man-made, natural, or something. So anyway,
you're basically talking about applying spectroscopy to local phenomena in our own atmosphere, something like that.
Yes, yes. I was speaking about that because this is exactly what I'm doing now. I'm trying to optimize the technique of spectroscopy to try to take spectra of this kind of phenomena in order to attempt to search for the existence or absence of some crucial phenomena. Not only spectrochemical identification of spectral lines, for instance, which is useful because it can give us ideas about temperature, for instance, excitation temperature of the phenomenon. But I'm interested in the possibility that some of these phenomena are able to produce a Zeeman effect, namely a splitting of spectral lines due to a very strong magnetic field. This is the point. There are many models of people more or less mad, okay, but some are quite coherent from the physics point of view of a possibility that if these phenomena are not natural, but they are technological, someone is using very high current, something like a 20 million volts, okay, in order to create strong magnetic field. And this could be sustained clearly using superconducting materials that we don't have yet, okay? So if they are able to create in some way strong magnetic field, we want to see how much is that magnetic field, and we would see from the splitting of spectral lines.
All right, so hold on 1 second. Let me just fill people in who aren't up on spectroscopy. So the basic idea is that, you know, with a black body, something that is solid or liquid, you're going to get these like continuous rainbows. And then over top of that, if there's a gas present of some sort, you get these individual lines. We're talking about the different light wavelengths that you observe across the spectrum. And so something funny happens to these gas lines when they're in the presence of strong magnetic fields. Is that the effect that you're talking about?
Exactly, yes. I am speaking about atmospheric gas, so oxygen, hydrogen, in case also sodium, that could be ionized, and excited by a release of electricity, of temperature, because this would be a release of the electric resistance coming from the surface of the object, which would excite the atmospheric sort of envelope around itself, like a bubble made of excited gas, which would be a consequence of this strong electric field, which creates, I expect, a very strong magnetic field. So we want to try to measure that. And so I'm thinking what is the ideal way to do that, to measure this thing in a practical way, because if we wanted to measure this magnetic field, we need a high resolution. But if we want a high resolution, we need a very heavy instrument, okay, that we use in astrophysics, namely a resolution of lambda over delta lambda of 10,000, for instance, or even more.
Hold on. Let's talk about that.
You're like comparing the wavelengths there?
So you're saying like the shift, the delta lambda is the shift in wavelength after the Lyman splitting?
Zeeman
splitting, sorry.
It's the Zeeman splitting. It means the capability of the instrument to resolve two close lines. For instance, if I have a line that is 5,000 angstrom, and you have a line of 5,010 angstrom, if I have a low resolution, I would see only one line. They are merged together. But if I have a higher resolution, I can see them very resolved, very distinguished, the one from the other. So we have to go in a very fine way, because otherwise we would not see the splitting at all. But in this case, the problem, we have to make a compromise, because high-resolution instrument is too heavy, and we need to apply it to a pan-tilt camera to track the object once we have identified as an anomalous object. It's too heavy. And so we have to use a compromise. I have an instrument. I also have this prototype of an instrument that was made by an American physical chemist, which gives a medium resolution, which is anyway sufficient to see the Zeeman splitting if the magnetic field is particularly high, namely something between 10 and 1000 Tesla. In that case, we can see it.
Let me pause you for just a second. I want to go back to why it is that you suspect that there should be an anomalous or extreme electromagnetic phenomena going on with these UAPs.
Yeah, good question.
Right? What did you? Is this from an observation that you had, or is this just a suspicion that if they are some sort of advanced technology, that they should present this way?
Well, the point is that, first of all, I don't know if it's technology or not. Could be a natural phenomenon. But the point is that there is a very, very long casuistry of electromagnetic interference on electric device. It's really very long. And there is a PhD guy who collected all these witnesses. So these are not measurements, but
these are associated with UAPs. Is that what you mean?
Like in the sense that people experience some kind of EMF disturbance when they come by.
They experienced not only in their own body, but the television set, the cars, all of a sudden stops. And in many cases, these objects were not close at all. So the magnetic field must be really very strong, because you have to consider that an electrical dipole produces a magnetic field which decreases with the inverse of the cube of the distance. So if you have something like 10 Tesla, for instance, you can see its effect only at 2 kilometers of distance. But if people is seeing something that we know it's far away from them, and yet it creates these effects, it means that the magnetic field must be extremely strong.
Mm-hmm.
So
can you measure this for could you compare it to like a bolt of lightning or something? Is that a reasonable comparison? Or what are the current strengths that
it
that
must
we're
be
looking
stronger, because like a bolt of lightning, like
doesn't
if it
disturb the TV, right?
Yeah, like if it hits the TV, it disturbs it. But like it's not like
it's something more. A bolt of lightning is effective when it hits very close. In the case of this object, we have something that is more, and it's continuous. It's not something transient like electric lightning. It's something continuous that can last many minutes. And so I studied the casuistry, and I wanted to verify with our instruments if we can measure something like that. The point is that all my efforts are to try to find a trick to obtain good data. So with acceptable signals to noise ratio, something like of 10, greater than 10 at least, in order to measure that and to see if it's present or not. And
so can we go back to the spectra? Did you examine existing data already to try to get some spectral information? You know, you mentioned that you could extrapolate temperatures, and have you had some success with that already in terms of looking at other people's photos? Or
because I mean, this is something that you have to gather the data at the source, right? So your camera
so you're
already
chasing a UAP in the first place.
But I mean, people will they will take videos, and we know that we have some, like the FLIR cameras are capturing some infrared stuff, but it's not spectral cameras. So
no, they're not. Most of the so-called data that have been taken so far show only images, or sometimes videos, such as the project Hessdalen in Norway, with which I collaborated since 30 years, by the way. There are videos, okay. They are spectra, but spectra are too low resolution to be considered. I already took spectra of this kind of phenomena using spectral gratings, but the resolution is too low. And
the spectral gratings are the ones that you can just buy on like Amazon, where you can get like sheets of them.
You can buy. Some are of good quality. For instance, I have a rainbow optics spectroscope or stargazer spectroscope. They cost $300-400. You put in front of the lens and you take spectra, which is not bad spectra. In one cases, I found spectral lines of oxygen in the red part of the spectrum. So this shows it's a thermal phenomenon that is exciting the atmosphere. In other cases... Can
I ask you a real quick question? I'm sorry. Since you're a physicist, I'm really curious. How does that thing work? How does the spectrum... Is it a refractive process?
Like the spectral grating?
Yes.
Yeah.
It's a diffraction.
So it splits different wavelengths out by interfering? There's an interference process or something?
Yeah, something like that. Okay. And it's in the optical spectrum from 3,800 angstrom up to 6,500, more or less, in the optical spectrum.
Yes.
I would like to, before we get deeper into what it is that you've seen, I want to make sure that we have a context for what it is that you're looking at. Because you said at the beginning where you had to go through a filtering process of things that are clearly man-made or explainable versus the things that are not. And so can you give us a sense of we're still very green in terms of pursuing the UAP question. So give us context for what you think is reputable or worth further investigation and what isn't.
Yeah, good question. Well, first of all, we already built a database, for instance, inside the Galileo project, of which I'm a collaborator.
With Avi Loeb?
Yes.
Okay.
Yeah,
cool.
I'm an affiliate researcher of the Galileo project.
Very cool. We had him on the show last year.
There is a group, there are several groups, clearly, many researchers. Everyone has his own specialization. And we tried to do machine learning to the software to be able to distinguish things that we already know are man-made. So several photos of drones of several kind, airplanes of every kind, even shelling in the sky. You can photograph a shell while it's flying in the air if you use high-speed camera. We are putting all of these things that can be explained, very easily explained. Then there are birds that are illuminated by street lights, for instance, from below, can appear like I would say flotillas of UFOs or something. There are many causes. Insects that are going in front of the lens can simulate something like that. There are New Age people that speak about orbs. This is dust or snowflakes or spray or insects or whatever. There are really many causes of that. Then there are the natural one. There are satellites. There is the movement of, for instance, of a very luminous planet like Venus, Jupiter through the clouds that give the impression that it is moving, but they are the clouds that are moving. There are really, or there is also laser beams from discos that go out from the window, hit the clouds. They excite the clouds and make you see some luminous spots moving very quickly in the sky, but that come from the laser. So there are many, really very many causes that can be explained. But there are places in the world, like Hessdalen in Norway, but not only in Hessdalen, you also have something in match in the United States, like Marfa in Texas, the Brown Mountain, the Indian reservation of Yakima, where this kind of phenomenon occur more often. So, and we know that these phenomena are not man-made, are not anything that we know. So we want to try to place the instruments just there because these areas can be considered like laboratory areas for measurements. And we have attempted this research. It's very difficult, but using automatic station, something that is multi-wavelength instruments, multi-mode instruments like magnetometers, also radio spectrometers, and all-sky cameras, infrared camera, FLIR camera, work all together and monitor the sky 24 hours, trying to catch something. Then the artificial intelligence decided which is a good target to consider, especially from the all-sky survey. And after that, the data is sent to a pan-tilt camera with a specialized camera that try to zoom on the object of interest, with which you can take images, you can take videos, or in case also spectra. The spectral part is now under project because we are doing something completely new, different from the past. We have to solve several problems. We have to understand what is the best, because we need well-calibrated data, high-quality data with a acceptable signal-to-noise ratio. We need something that is done exactly with the same criterion that we use for astronomy. Okay, so it's not easy. We try this attempt. This is my part, the spectroscopy, but not only spectroscopy, also high-speed photometry.
Mm-hmm. How do you pick the places where you're going to try to demo this technology?
Right, because I mean, there's some places that have these consistent phenomena. You mentioned Hessdalen, you mentioned Marfa. Are there other places?
Yeah, there are other places. There is Marfa in Texas. There is the Brown Mountain. There is Joplin somewhere in the United States.
I think Mississippi.
And recently there is the Catalina Island in California, if I well remember, where American pilots of F-18E had encounters with this phenomena, and which were documented using targeting pod, the normal targeting pod, which is working also in the infrared, and they confirmed that there was really something that it's worth studying. So there are several recurrence places or sometimes there are places where the phenomenon occurs all of a sudden, and then it happens, like in Brazil, in Colares 30, 40 years ago, and then it goes away. Okay, so it's difficult. It's really very difficult. We wanted to make an attempt because we wanted to understand what's going on. We are not there to say, oh, we are searching for the aliens on Earth. We want to, at least I speak for myself, to unmask what is appearing in our sky. I cannot even exclude that someone is cheating us, but this is my opinion, okay? Because it is very well known that the military have some kind of artifacts which are optical and also audio that are used for so-called psychological warfare. So they create these things in the sky using several, devices to cheat, to
distract. I saw this really cool article in Forbes a couple of years ago. I've mentioned it before on the show, but it was like this defense contractor had developed a tool to project a heat signature hologram from a satellite, essentially. And I'm like, wow, that sounds exactly like those Tic Tac UFO things. I don't know if it was or not, but I thought it was really interesting that it it was a very small headline. It disappeared. But I was like, that seems like that could explain some of this stuff if people were...
It could. And all these things would anyway appear, especially from spectroscopy, because if there is some kind of artificial light, like flares, for instance, we expect what kind of spectral lines they would produce, and we would unmask them immediately. Okay, so the important thing is rationally unmask. Literally, it's like investigative work, and see what's going on, because people wants to know. People has to use critical thinking, and you know how easy is to remotely control people. With a light in the sky, you can remotely control people in the same way in which I remotely control my cat with my laser spot on the ground.
Well, so I have a... It is very interesting, and I think that you're touching upon a psychological aspect of this, which is that people want to believe and people want to be part of something that is larger than themselves, and there's this entire structure around the phenomenon that's very spiritual and psychological.
Tantalizing.
And one of the things that makes it so tantalizing is that oftentimes the footage is grainy and not very good, and so you see something but you can't really tell what it is. And now that you have these setups with these cameras, are you starting to get really, really high resolution footage of these events in Norway and in Marfa, or?
Well, no, there are some of quite acceptable quality in Norway. We have done missions there. I've been in Norway 4 times, and we had high-resolution video cameras, for instance, where you can see many details, and also very shocking aspects. For instance, lights that are spherical. They don't show any structure, so you would think it's a natural phenomenon of the ball lightning kind, maybe, but much bigger. All of a sudden, the spherical thing becomes a perfect rectangle. Clearly, it's a rectangle.
Whoa.
I can say that because there are not 4 pixels there, but there are 400 pixels. So I use also another camera just to have a confirmation that that's becomes a rectangle. It becomes a rectangle. So I don't know how it happens. Sometimes I think if it's a natural phenomenon, I would think about snowflakes. When you look at snowflakes, there is a geometric, symmetrical pattern. And so what happens with the plasmas? And so there is a lot that we have still to learn. Could be something very interesting. It's not necessary that we find aliens or something. It could be, but there could be something very interesting in nature, and maybe triggered by the ground, by piezoelectricity, for instance, and a new source of energy. Because it's very interesting to understand how it works, because in that case we might reproduce all this in a laboratory, a very clean source of energy. This is one of the perspectives that we have. But yes, we have some good, not perfect resolution videos or photos, but some are good. Most of them are low resolution. They're lights that you could create them by yourself with a laser or something. Okay, some are good, but we need much better quality. And so far, there's not been any initiative, scientific. Well, there's been, but not enough scientific initiative. We need something much more systematic. And the Galileo project, for instance, is pushing very much in this direction. So Professor Loeb is doing very well, absolutely well. I agree with him. I don't agree with him with some things, but I agree with him with the general strategy, absolutely. Yeah, and rigor.
Do you feel like it's like, okay, there's a very real possibility that what you're studying is some sort of defense project, right? That's at least a possibility.
Could be.
To some portion of what you're studying, I should say. Do you feel like that is an almost impossible task because whatever sort of information you try to bring to the table will be denied or not given the full attention because it's like a national security threat of some sort?
Well, there is this risk, clearly. There is this risk because I think that this conversation that will be public is very useful to tell who is important on the higher sphere that the intent, I speak for myself, but I think that also my colleagues agree, in the intent to clarify something that is creating confusion in society. It's creating, how to say, emotional turmoil or something like that. If there is something that is a threat to national security, it would be my moral, ethical duty to inform the military immediately. If we find something that could be technological, that could be threatening, my first, and I wouldn't ask any permission to anyone to do that. I would immediately inform the military personnel and also secret services if necessary it's my duty, okay?
Yeah, I guess I'm just saying, like, what if what you're studying the military knows about because they built it in the first place? They're not going to be very interested in entertaining the idea that it's been characterized very well by somebody. Do you know what I'm saying?
Because if it's so if it is something that is, let's say, the U.S. military or some Western military alliance that's working on, it would be inauspicious for that to be disclosed as being a project of the military rather than remaining something unknown and extraterrestrial. Like, do you experience any kind of tension with national security or with military personnel?
Would you even know?
Would you even know?
Something has happened in the past. Well, first of all, I had an important conference, a scientific conference here in North Italy, and it was about this light phenomena, and a way to monitor and to showing also the data that we have so far. And it's interesting because there was the chief of a military base of tactical bombers in my region, in Italy, in North Italy. So they came on purpose. They were on the front row listening. And at some point, the guy, he was very kind. He was a big officer with his attendant, and he told, don't call them UFOs, okay? He told me, don't call UFOs, don't use that term. And I told, well, I'm using the term not as alien spacecraft, but only as something that is not identified, like Dr. Allen Hynek, astronomer, said in the past, just in the way. That was one. Another one was, this was the biggest. I was at a place, I cannot say which place, but an important place to try to take measurements of this phenomena. And yes, one night we saw something that was not simply a light ball, but it was just a triangular object that was floating in the sky, started to move towards us. We were 5. We saw it in 2 different directions, and that was a machine, no doubt. But it could have been also a kind of a drone, but no noise at all. It was floating, it was hovering like an helicopter, and it disappeared from us. 5 days before, I met 2 technicians of a NATO radar control station. asking them, they came to see us and very kind. And I told them, please, if you have any radar track, if you can send to us, because we can make something scientifically important that we would furnish to you too then, because I was told after the sighting that we had, which we couldn't document because it was like a surprise, I was told that 1 month later, that a technician, I asked, so what about the radar data of the NATO control station? They were ordered to delete the so-called boogie. They call it boogie. Delete. Whatever has to do with this kind of phenomenon must be deleted. Okay. This goes against science. Absolutely. And I think the military, which I support, when they are not dictatorial like Mr. Putin or someone else, are very important, and it's important to inform them meticulously on what we are doing, to send periodically reports, which I have done and which I will do again in order to protect the security. But my goal is not military. My goal is to try to understand the physics of the phenomenon, or to try to unmask a colossal cheating to humanity. It could be also that. So I'm called with this.
Yeah, that makes a lot of sense to me. That I mean, at least for that particular phenomenon that you're describing, it seems like if it is a machine indeed, somebody's probably aware of that and maybe not too interested in you studying it since they're studying it.
Kind of, but there's been this huge push towards disclosure, and I've been looking at it and trying to piece together the rationale for it. Because I just briefly saw this, that Harry Reid, who was the Nevada senator who started disclosure in the United States, there was a follow-up piece a while later where he was put on record intimating that what was observed by the Navy pilots was not extraterrestrial. And it seemed like he was implying that that he felt that there were other explanations. And yet there's a huge ecosystem of people that are out claiming to be former CIA contractors, former Area 51 people, like the entire Tom DeLonge project, where they're speaking about this in the sense of having authority from the government to disclose, and it just feels weird to me. Like, what do you make of the like podcast circuit UAP experts?
There are some leads that, well, I'm not close to the community of ufologists. I'm a physical scientist. Even if some ufologists are very well prepared, and I have to be honest, I have to tell, some are good. Both the skeptical kind and also the possibilist kind. I would say that my impression, even if I cannot demonstrate, is that there is someone around who pretend to represent the government, but they are only spreading disinformation everywhere. Their goal is to create confusion, to deviate, to divert people who are very much involved. And I am very much involved in this thing. And I normally prefer not to listen to the stories of disclosure of something, because there is a mix of, in my opinion, lies, very well architected lies, new age bullshit or something like that. And I don't know. I don't believe them.
I mean, I'd completely agree that it's hard to explain why in the world the government would allow somebody to just roll out on the podcast circuit who's, disclosing all of this top secret information. Like, I don't know if you know anybody in the military, but the few people I've talked to who have top secret clearance or have clearance at all, it's like an extraordinarily vetted process, and the consequences are grave if you disclose information that you weren't supposed to. Like, even people trying to publish books about wars they've been in and so forth have to go through this huge chain of command to be able to do that and get, approval from the highest levels. And so the fact that these people are even out there making all this media, to me, is just like, it just can only be explained as intentional disinformation that is endorsed, or just guys just making shit up.
And that's the part of it that really freaks me out, because I feel like it is so, and you even see that there's people that are in government. There's senators, sitting Congress people who are talking about disclosure, and they're talking about the phenomenon, and I can't get a read on what exactly is going on, and it feels like audience capture. Do you know that term?
Yeah.
So it's like people who benefit greatly from talking about it are induced to continue talking about it without any real basis of fact or data, because most people who talk about this, they talk a lot, but it's not like they're actually saying anything.
It's a huge hit, right? On the media circuit, right? Like, you've seen channels or content creators who start off exploring lots of different science, and then they do like a UAP video and it blows up, and then they're just like, well, I'll just do UAP videos from now on. And so you end up with this huge proliferation of content about the tantalizing possibilities of extraterrestrial advanced intelligence and all of this stuff, which is really fun and fantastical to dream about. But it also, in a way, shut down actual scientific dialogues that could have been happening in their place. Yeah,
it seems they do that on purpose, just to they want to capture, like you said before, the emotions of people. It's a way, I think, to manipulate the mind of people, because it has a very strong emotional content. They have no problem. This kind of people who is spreading spectacular videos, which in most cases are made with CGI, by the way, no one is telling anything to them. They are completely free to cheat the others. No one is attacking them. Maybe they will get an award about that. For instance, in the ancient past, there was a guy who was called George Adamski, 1950s, more or less. And he spread photos of UFOs. Some are interesting, difficult to create them. Some others are just lanterns. Okay. So this guy, I know that when he died, he was buried in the Arlington Cemetery, where heroes are buried. Why? Is it a chance? So did he participate to a campaign of social emotional manipulation using UFO? Because it can be a weapon. It can be a weapon. I know your government, when he was fighting in Vietnam, was using a lot of psychological warfare. And UFO thing might be a sort of psychological warfare to manipulate society. We have to be very careful. And clearly, someone in the higher sphere is not very happy that there are some scientists that want to look through the keyhole of the door, because that's exactly what you want to do. And we do that not only for our curiosity. We want to do that to make a service to society, and invite society to think with their own head, with their own rationality, even if extraterrestrial visitation is possible, absolutely possible.
Interesting. So it's like, it's fascinating that this gentleman was buried in a military.
What was his name? The guy who was buried in Arlington?
George Adamski.
George Adamski.
Because this to me really points out the whole series of all of his work. It would really suggest that it has a roots in intelligence. We saw the same thing with the Epstein trial. Maxwell, his partner in crime, her dad was also involved in all sorts of intelligence projects throughout his life before he got into publishing. And then, surprisingly, he was also buried in a Mossad graveyard in Israel. And there was all these super high-ranking Mossad officials at his funeral, and he died under weird circumstances. So it seems to be kind of a funny pattern that a little breadcrumb that's left out with these intelligence schemes.
Well, I mean, I think that that's the water in which we swim. Like, I've been listening to this podcast called The Service, which is about an intelligence operation in New Zealand during the Cold War. And they're talking about spycraft, and they're talking about the way that the Western governments were working against the Soviet Union, and New Zealand was kind of this battleground for the two sides. And it just becomes apparent how much is happening beneath the level of our awareness, because everything is kept so secret. Documents are destroyed. The things that we find out about, like when MK Ultra came out, it wasn't because the CIA decided to disclose intentionally. I think that it was that there was like a set of documents that hadn't been destroyed. And so the only reason that it became public knowledge is because somebody requested it, and it turned out that they hadn't been destroyed, and so it was released. But how much is destroyed regularly, and how much is happening behind the scenes in order for these states to manipulate the world condition against one another? It just seems like the default. And
so there's two layers of information, right? There's like what's actually happening, and then there's the narrative that everybody's exposed to about what's happening. And it's nowhere more apparent right now than in this UAP discussion, I think.
Yeah, you said something really interesting where you said that there were people involved with national security who were unhappy about the scientists trying to look through the keyhole. Can you say more about that?
Sorry, can you say the last few words, because I didn't hear them well?
Can you say more about that? So you said that there's national security people who are unhappy about the scientists trying to look through the keyhole.
Yeah, it's my impression. It's my impression. But I tell you why. I never notice anyone who tried to attack people who is telling, "Oh, last night I had sexual intercourse with an alien." No problem. They can tell that. They can tell. Oh, the other day I was playing golf with Probosh's alien face. They don't do anything to them. They are very happy when people is telling nonsense to the public. But my impression is that they try to attack those who want to make the thing seriously. And the history of these happenings, these attacks against scientists studying UFOs, is full of events. One of them was a doctor, famous atmospheric physicist, Jim McDonald. Jim McDonald was repeatedly attacked. He was very dedicated to this research. He was repeatedly attacked by his colleagues. They tried to discredit him, and they put him in such a condition of depression that he committed suicide. And unfortunately, he succeeded. They organize situations in which they put all your friends against you, your wife against you, and they induce. This is a kind of mind control, I think. So scientists are very dangerous, and I am dangerous as well.
We saw there's a parallel.
So what was the last part of that?
Go ahead.
No, you said scientists are dangerous. You're dangerous as well, and
I've also been attacked.
You've also been okay.
I just wanted to add that we've there are, and I can't think of the name of the gentleman, but there are similar driven to suicide stories about the MK Ultra project, which are quite interesting. It's and concerning some of the scientists at the top of that, being dosed by their peers with LSD and jumping out of windows, that kind of thing. So that's really interesting. I mean, we've been like very skeptical of this situation, I think for good reason so far. But is there any part of your mind that entertains the idea that these are actually some advanced technological structure from elsewhere, not of this world? Do you play with that in your mind at all?
Yes. You have been speaking about MK Ultra and mind control. It could be a technology of mind coming from others that are not from Earth, and that they want to try to manipulate us. So they want to try to manipulate us, spreading hoaxes, but on purpose, to try to hide their presence. Let's call that so. I think there is a possibility that there is a technology of mind that can interact with people's mind, simulating an abduction, for instance. They can create a sort of hallucination, which is almost real, the so-called hypnagogic and hypnopompic images that you have in your mind. They give you the illusion to be there because those images are so clear and beautiful, but it didn't happen. It happened only inside their mind. So I believe that most of people who experience the so-called abduction phenomenon are sincere, and I respect them, and they must be studied. But they don't think that what has happened really happened in the physical reality. So this is a terroristic system to manipulate people. It's someone is doing experiment, and in this case, it could be coming from our people and not from others. For instance, using very low frequency waves like VLF, ELF, you can induce hallucinations. You can obtain the same, but in a different way. We're using microwaves in our brain. Professor, Canadian professor, I don't remember his name, but he was very famous. He did experiments with God element, he called, inducing magnetic fields in the brain and giving you the impression that you have an alien sitting on the chair.
Oh my God, that's terrifying.
Yeah, no, somewhat depending on the culture of the people, some is seeing aliens, some are seeing the devil, someone sees the Virgin Mary according to your religion or something. So you can trigger this, and it's a weapon. It's a weapon to manipulate society, and I am not surprised that someone might irradiate people to make this kind of experiment, to see cynically, to see what is the effect that comes out from that, because this is a war. It's a weapon mechanism that can be used in war against like a asymmetric war or like something like that. So yeah,
I think it's reasonable to assume that war pays for most technological progress on this planet, sadly. And so if we see some sort of technological anomaly, it makes a lot of sense to think about who would have the money to even achieve such a project. And so, it seems conspiratorial, but it's like, who in the world could afford this otherwise?
I mean, look, propaganda and manipulation of the mind has been a stated goal of intelligence services all around the world for the last century. This is not a stunning revelation that anyone would argue with. There's scads of records that the intelligence services in the United States were desperately trying to figure out mind control drugs. And you mentioned the researcher in Canada, and I think this is probably somebody else, but there was a guy who was involved heavily in MK Ultra at McGill University, And the entire principle of his work was the ability to erase somebody's mind and to reprogram them in order to believe whatever new ideas were implanted. And that research was, not particularly successful. I think the legacy is that they just psychologically destroyed everybody who was involved.
Very destructive processes, right? Ted Kaczynski is a great example.
Yeah, because Ted Kaczynski he was at Harvard, and he was
the Unabomber.
Interrogated, or he participated in these the early MK Ultra experiments where they would basically try to psychologically break down the participants, where he was invited in to present some kind of argument, and the experimenter's job was to basically make him come apart at the seams, to belittle him and to degrade him until they broke him psychologically.
Over many years.
Yeah, but so the point here that I'm trying to make is that oftentimes we have this perspective on history where we look into the past and we're like, man, they did crazy things back then. And we look at the present and there's not the same...
We would never do that now.
There just isn't the same amount of evidence, right? You look through these historical documents and you're like, well, they were doing this in the 60s, but it's not like there's any place where there's a document that's like, we're not going to continue doing this and we no longer are interested in attempting to control the minds of people at a distance. That is still the ultimate desire, because what greater tool do you have in statecraft than to control the minds of your opponents? Whether to shake the society apart from
or
the
your
inside,
constituents, from a more pessimistic standpoint.
Yeah. So this seems like the default. This seems like this is what people want to do at the highest level of power, is to be able to have a lever in the minds of people where they can switch it on to say what it is that they want to say. And that's kind of what's frightening, is that this seems to touch upon this. And I wonder if there is evidence that this is a mind control attempt. Is there also work being done to disturb its effects, to prevent it from being effective?
Well, yes, theoretically you can screen a house with a Faraday cage, for instance, or something like that, and because you have these ones. If they are using electromagnetic device, they are all clearly transmitters. So you can screen a house from that, but you cannot screen your mind. That's a problem, because biophysics is biophysics, and when it affects the brain. Oh yeah, the guy was Michael Persinger. I was speaking about him, a Canadian neurophysiologist, very famous.
Is he still alive?
No, I think he's dead since a few years, and he did a lot of publications about this God helmet thing, and they were injecting high frequency magnetic field in the brain, and they were noticing that people was having a very strong hallucination, but not all the people. It depends on the people. Some didn't, many did, but this research is still controversial because there are groups elsewhere, even a Danish group, I think, they tried to reproduce the results and they didn't obtain the same results. So it's not absolute truth. There is something, okay, because it was published on peer-reviewed journals, but it's interesting and very disquieting thinking about these possibilities.
Well, I mean, it doesn't seem beyond belief, because we know, do you know about transcranial magnetic stimulation?
I heard something about that, yeah.
Well, it's basically that if you apply a sufficiently powerful magnet to the surface of the cranium, you can change brain states. And a few years ago, maybe about 2 years ago, there was actually a Nature paper where they had effectively designed a magnetic stimulation implant, like a brain pacemaker, basically, that they put into this lady's brain, and they cured her intractable depression. And it's not quite at the level of, being able to implant specific emotions and thoughts and experiences, but it is apparent that by applying an electromagnetic field, that you can induce significant changes in the functioning of the brain.
Interesting.
Yeah, it's actually, I think, become a pretty halfway popular fringe depression treatment at this point.
I worked as an outdoor guide for a while, and one of the ladies who was on a tour with me worked at a transcranial magnetic stimulation clinic. And she was talking about how she would use it on herself in the middle of the day for a pick-me-up when she was starting to get tired instead of drinking a cup of coffee. And she would basically just, zap herself. And then she'd go on fully energized for the rest of the day. And she had kids that had depression and autism and anxiety, and they would come in for these treatments. And she was like, it's crazy because if you tune it incorrectly, you can exacerbate the condition, and you have to really play with the way that the frequencies that you apply in order to dampen whatever's going on inside rather than accelerate it. But this is a field. There's conferences, there's manufacture of the machines. This is
I'm thinking about Nikola Tesla was doing something like that among his many inventions. He made a sort of electrotherapic machine that was working in very low frequencies. Then I'm thinking also to Dr. Hulda Clark, who made the so-called zapper thing. And it's electromagnetic emission. And I remember I was with a colleague, a geophysicist, during our mission. I was bitten by an insect. So it inflated my hand, and she had this little device which she applied to my hand. I felt a sense of heat, and the pain went away completely. So it's very interesting how electromagnetic waves are working, and maybe medicine from biochemical will becoming electromagnetic. I don't know. I'm thinking about the quantum electrodynamic field that allegedly surrounds our body. Because
you do a lot of, I don't know about a lot, but you've written a bit about quantum mechanics and the production of consciousness, right? Do you imagine that to be an electromagnetic process at heart as well, consciousness? Or can you tell us a bit about your ideas, the quantum consciousness ideas?
Yeah, well, I've been reading several aspects. Clearly, the most important one is the theory by Roger Penrose and Stuart Emmerich, telling that consciousness is born from the collapse of the wave function that keep together the microtubules in the brain. Every time you have a collapse, which occurs spontaneously, not by the observation, but spontaneously, at the level of quantum vacuum and at the level of space-time. It's like a black hole, practically. Every time, for every 60th of second, there is a process according to this theory. So this is not electromagnetic mechanism, it's a quantum mechanism that produces consciousness moments. And I'm very interested because in some way it connects with David Bohm, quantum potential, and implicate and explicate order. The explicate order is our brain, our physical brain, and the implicate order is consciousness that emerges from a quantum process. I've been studying that, but there is a lot of things because I've been thinking about other possibilities. What happens? Are we sure that consciousness can be born only from microtubules inside the neurons, from a biological body, or is it possible that other means can bring consciousness, such as plasma, for instance? In some situations, plasmas can be entangled together in only particular situations that have been simulated. So I'm wondering about some light bulbs in the sky. Is it possible that they behave like a brain, that the particles of of the plasma behave like the microtubules in the brain, and that they have a short moment of consciousness or something like that. We don't know enough about the mechanism of consciousness and not even about the mechanism of life. We think life is based on carbon, but we're right, of course, but we're not sure if silicon can be done. We are not sure. Someone thinks that if you use a molecule of, Bose-Einstein condensate, they're quantum coherent, they could host consciousness as well. And it's a long thing, okay.
Well, I mean, I think that at the heart of it is that it's a resonant phenomenon, which I think is very related to disturbance by electromagnetic phenomena. Because if you have a resonant quantum phenomena, and it sets up an electromagnetic field that's detectable, because we know that a conscious brain has an electromagnetic field, then it links it directly to your ability to manipulate it using electromagnetic means. And so the two seem inexorably related. And the origin point is difficult. We've talked to a lot of people that seem to think that, we live in a consciousness first universe, that the consciousness is the foundation and that everything else is built on top of it. And so when you see something happening in the brain, what you're really seeing is it is reacting to something that is primary. And our neural architecture, what microtubules or whatever, is just the antenna that is harnessing something that is really the stuff that the universe is made out of. But whatever the mechanism by which you arrive at your theory of consciousness, it seems apparent that it is modifiable by electromagnetic radiation. And do you know the work of Michael Levin?
No.
Oh, wow, you're going to love this. Okay, so Michael Levin...
I have to read it, yeah.
Well, he's
coming back on the show, by the way, everybody who's listening.
Yeah, he's coming back in April.
He's going to be here in April again.
So his experiments is he works with these two-headed flatworms. They're called planaria. And if you cut this flatworm in half, it regenerates into two flatworms. And he discovered that if you cut it in half and as it is regenerating, you apply an electric field, you can permanently change its morphology. So he can grow a planaria with two heads, with two tails, with these different body plans, and then he takes away the electromagnetic field and he cuts it in half, and without any changes to the genome on the textual level, he will eternally regrow planaria with two heads. Without the application of the magnetic field.
And
again.
It gets bigger than that, right?
Impressive. Yeah, I didn't know that.
He's really trying to apply this to all sorts of regenerative medicine, and also just the idea that cells are communicating in processes that aren't as simple as receptor-ligand interactions, which is obviously the bedrock of most molecular medicine approaches, and let's just say anatomy at the cellular level right now. And so he has some really compelling data on those processes too, by using different, electricity blockers, basically disrupting the communication cycles.
His other work is that he's making these little biobots where he can apply the same principles to making biological robots from skin cells. And so he can take the scrapings off of a frog skin cell, put them in a dish where they're just in solution, apply the appropriate external magnetic field, and then they form these structured blobs. And the structured blobs are then able to go around and, like sheepdogs, herd the cells that are remaining in solution to make more of themselves. And then they behave. But they're skin cells. Brought into... It defies belief almost.
I mean, it certainly points to the idea that there are field interactions at play in developmental processes. It also makes me think of Brett Kagan's work too. Who's this? Do you know Brett Kagan? He's got this
Cortical Labs.
Yeah, it was called like Dish Brain was the big headline that was going around a little while ago. But he essentially has some cortical neurons in a dish, and he has interfaced them with a computer in such a way that they learn how to play the game Pong. I don't know if you remember Pong, but it's like...
Yeah, I do.
Yeah, one of the first video games. And he's found... What's really interesting is he's found a way to essentially reward the cells by applying a predictable pulsed electrode. Yeah, they're predictably pulsing them with electromagnetic signals. And so when they miss the ball, he gives them chaos, essentially, and the cells don't like that. And through this reinforcement process, he's actually taught them to play Pong. And it makes you think even deeper about the ways in which cells could be manipulated electromagnetically and how that could be playing out in advanced technology already.
And also, I maybe this is something that you could comment on, is how we live in a world that is so suffused with electromagnetic radiation that is artificial. And I wonder if you have any sense of how that affects minds and bodies, or if that's something that's outside of your field.
Well, it's not my field, but I had a colleague who was a physicist with an interest in biophysics that gave presentation with all the effects that electromagnetic radiation can cause in different organs of our body according to the wavelength. As I said, it's not my field at all, but mostly VLF and ELF radiation and microwaves are particularly important in affecting the brain or also the cells of the body. Cells of the body clearly is microwave, so high frequency radio waves. But I remember there was a very well done table that she did, but I don't remember honestly what was written because it's not my field. But it's quite interesting to measure electromagnetic field, and I have an observation in the sense that there are a lot of people who protest against antennas of cell phones, for instance, or something, and they say they're killing us, they're inducing us cancer or something like that. I had a tri-field magnetometer in my hand, which was measuring also electric field. I wanted to measure that. And I noticed that the effect was dropping from a high, how many volts were there? I don't remember, 7,000 volts. I don't remember. The effect was dropping after 80 meters. After 80 meters, when you are 80 meters far from the pole, nothing happens. And people seems not to know that anyway, the electromagnetic radiation is dropping with the inverse of the square of the distance. So,
and you have like near field effects and far field effects when it comes to antenna, right? There's a very different power distribution in the close range than the distant.
Yeah.
And actually, we had a funny experience. We were trying to shoot a film up on this big tall hill in San Francisco recently, and
right underneath the Sutro Tower.
Yeah, like we weren't that. I don't think we were 80 meters away from them. Were we? Maybe we were. But it was funny because we were all set up to film, and then we listened to the mics, and we were like picking up radio stations inside the microphones, and it was just like, oh wow, this is weird because it's just something you don't think about that often. You know how much electromagnetic excitation can be invisible and just happening, you know, and you're just not aware of it. But yeah, we were very close, I guess.
Nice.
Yeah, I mean, I had a friend who was, because I think that one of the things that people were worried about 5G was that you have to have more repeaters, right? So a cell phone tower that is LTE or 4G is centrally located, but for 5G you have to have much more frequent repeaters for the system. And he got a 5G transmitter and attempted to see if he could mutate yeast with it, because he was like, look, if this is actually causing any kind of DNA break or any kind of damage, we should be able to detect it. And so he actually set up like a garage laboratory and did all the right things, registered his hypothesis beforehand, double-blinded it, and there was nothing there. And then he was like, okay, well, there's a theory, there's a lady who works at Caltech Her name is Jackie Barton. And her theory is that DNA is an electromagnetic antenna. And so the way that damage gets repaired is that there's a disturbance in the electromagnetic field that the repair proteins are attracted to. And so he was like, okay, well, it might be possible that if you break the DNA beforehand and then you apply the 5G radiation, then you're not going to be able to get repair that happens. And he tried that, and it didn't work either. And so it seems like there isn't any clear evidence that it's causing harm, but people really, I think that what it is that people they don't like modernity. Like, I think that that's really what it comes down to, is that the radiation and the cell phones and the computers and all of the technology is just reflective of the disturbing times in which we live, where we're separated from whatever evolutionary context we might have one day had. And we're lost in space a little bit. And so people's attention gets turned towards these things for psychological reasons rather than necessarily biological ones.
Yeah, too many anyway are afraid of 5G, but there is suspicion by older generation people also against technology. I remember when I was doing my PhD, we were making first publications, with the research group, and my boss didn't want to write directly on the computer. He was writing by hand. I told, why don't you write on a computer so you can delete, you can add? There is some resistance of the old generation. And I am just on the border to enter into the old generation. I'm realizing also the way in which the new synthesizers are done is different. The technology, the way in which you change sound parameters is completely different. And I realized that I belong to an old generation. So.
Yeah, are you a fan of analog synthesizers? Is that your jam?
Yeah, analog. I have also digital, Roland, I have others, and not only this one. But with analog sound, you can obtain something very more suggestive. I don't want to imitate the sound of known instruments, but I want to create alien sounds.
Yeah.
And that with analog instruments you can do. And
and that might be just because they replicate more what electric currents are like in nature, right? Analog synthesizers are really simple. It's basically like you're keying in on some frequency, and you can change the shape of that. Like you can make it resonate more, but the production isn't just these simple on and off switches that you get with digital. And, there's some really good digital modelers, but they're still usually trying to reproduce what you would just normally happen into. I think what you're trying to get at is there's the real joy of creating synthesizer music is discovering new sounds that no one's ever made before. Yeah. And, I totally feel that. We've got an MS-20 here, which is our only analog synthesizer. But it can get some amazing, beautiful sounds out of it for such a little box. Yeah.
Absolutely. Also, soundscapes that you can create with chords, for instance. There are some chords, the way in which you set up the parameter when you switch the decay, attack, decay, sustain, release, and you put a total release and total sustain, the sounds goes very slowly down. And to simulate, for instance, with I don't remember, it's a sine wave, was it? You can create a sort of human voices practically. And that I was almost able to do that. I don't like virtual synthesizers because I don't know. Maybe my sound card is not good enough to with
Yeah, there's no
omnisphere.
knobs to pull on and stuff too. There's something to that, like physically getting away from computers while you're creating music. I feel like it really
you
helps
do
you.
everything with a mouse. Okay, instead it should be nice that you can you have a touch screen so that you can change with the finger on the knob. So for instance, I have the Moog modular, which it's identical to the real one, but it's a problem to change all the parameters with a mouse all the time, especially when you are, in real time, you're playing in front of the people or something, and then it's not practical. So,
Man, yeah, I love your music too. We were listening to it all morning, and it's just it's so soothing, and it's a kind of music that I'm always looking for, and I have difficulty finding that kind of music for whatever reason. I find it really useful for studying and reading, and it's it's a very contemplative
thank you.
music. Yeah.
Thank you. I change from sometimes very rhythmic, some others they're plain space like sounds, or it's my meditation moment, and I always start from I need to like the sound that I create. When I like the sound, then the inspiration for the music comes as well. Then I decide afterwards the rhythm and the soloist instrument. It's I never get tired about that. I published a lot on Bandcamp, for instance, and yes.
Do you ever play with other people, or is it just
Yeah.
Is this you do? Yeah.
Yeah, I did, but there was electric and classical guitar. It didn't fit. It's a kind of music that maybe it fits with the electric guitar. For instance, when you think about the Tangerine Dream music, sometimes they were using soloist of electric guitar, synthesized electric guitar anyway, but flute, no, flute, I don't think it fits. There was our friend who was completely buried by our instruments, and he was trying to play flute. We had to put the volume down because no one was listening to the flute. Okay, so no, it doesn't fit.
I tried one time. Like we played in a little group with another guy who was an electronic musician, and what I found, I actually at some point switched over and started playing saxophone. But what I had to do was like feed the sax through all these guitar pedals in order to make it this otherworldly sound, because. The beauty of electronic music is it takes you to this other universe, right? It's not like something acoustic that you experience in everyday life. You're making this whole other landscape. And so, I think you have to really, really destroy your sound if you're going to try to bring in something acoustic.
Absolutely. You spoke about the sax. I tried once, my friend had the sax. I was never able to blow air inside the sax. I'm not able to. No sound is coming out.
Well, it's actually it's funny. There's I think Korg makes like an electronic saxophone. It looks exactly like the saxophone.
Korg
but
is
it's
doing that.
Yeah, and it sounds. We had when we were living in Portland, we would go to this weekly music night, and there's a guy who was really good at flutes, and he got one of these electronic saxes, and it was incredible because you can program it with a lot of different voices. And once you learn,
you could like have it play a synth. I think it's MIDI compatible. You could have it play an analog synth or something if you wanted to.
And it was really cool because there's something about, because I don't think you put any air into it, but you do keep it in your mouth, and so there's something about the way that you're holding it.
No, I think you blow into it.
You do think?
Yeah.
Well, so there's something about the structure of it that leads people to make melodies that they wouldn't otherwise on keyboards. Like there's something about the instrument itself that leads you into a certain pattern of sounds that you wouldn't get anywhere else because of the orientation.
Yeah, I understand. It's true. I don't know how my friend was able to blow into it, but he was able. It's fascinating, and but if I had to play with other musicians, I would play with other keyboard man-house synthesists because it's compatible. It's another universe, something it's something so.
Yeah, we had this really amazing experience when we were in Portland. We belonged to this community. It was called Portland's Synth Improvisers Community, I think.
Collective, I believe.
Collective. But it was really cool. What it was a bunch of nerds met up at a coffee shop after close, and they would put a mixer at every table, and everyone would bring headphones and a synth of some sort of electronic, music creation thing.
I think that the only rule was no guitars.
No guitars, no acoustic instruments, all silent, right? So you can move around from table to table and plug in, and people are just playing with each other, and there's just a completely different galaxy at every table. It was just a really awesome conception, and of course the pandemic ruined it, and then we moved away. But that was just such an amazing way to enjoy that art form, and it's
beautiful.
Because there's something so engaging about it, right? It's one thing to listen to it, but to actually participate in the creation of it, and you don't have to be a musician, really, right? To turn some knobs.
You just have to be sensitive.
You have to be sensitive. Really you got to be a good listener. So,
how did you start playing music? Was it something that you always did?
My aunt was a teacher, but she was also play piano. So I started with her piano. And but I'm self-taught. Unfortunately, I didn't study that. I studied by myself with the help of my aunt, which taught me the basics. Then I studied the electronics of the synths, and I passed immediately to synthesizers, which I've had many. And I had something like 10 or so, but I had to give them away because I was selling the house. I didn't know where to put them. And so I had to give away. I waited 10 years to start again. During the night, I was dreaming I'm playing some chords, and it was beautiful, but I have not anymore my synths. So I started again late, and I never stopped enjoying. I'm never bored. The only thing is that I would need new synths because, after many experiments, then you need the new oscillators, you need the new kind of synths, like the German Waldorf quantum synthesizer, which is doing incredible things, but it's quite too much expensive, really.
Yeah, that's one of the traps of electronic music, is you just want to keep buying new pieces because each instrument has its own character and it's going to evoke new ideas. And it's really funny. Like, synth nerds are just real gearheads, it's like...
Yeah, it was incredible. Like, people would have these suitcases, and it was like lunchbox modular units. And so they would have like 15, 20...
Guys would invest their whole paychecks in these things,
Yeah, I know.
These are like not rich dudes, and they've got like thousands of dollars worth of gear in these boxes.
But every week there's something new.
People who give up food for buying new modules for the Eurorex systems or something.
Yeah. That was me during grad school when I was trying to build this studio. It was like, well, could eat some peanut butter and...
Yeah, you play, you publish your music?
Yeah. Shiloh Delay. I published under the name Shiloh Delay. So that's my middle name and my last name. But yeah. I've been doing this since I was a kid, for sure. I write songs, but, I'm definitely into all sorts of atmospheric creations. It's a meditation for me, too. That's actually what I'm going to do this afternoon is...
when we have time, please put the link, because I want to listen to your music, or both of you, because I listen also the music of other musicians, because it's always instructive. We learn from each other, all the time. On Facebook, for instance, I'm in many groups, and especially the German ones, because I'm very close to that kind of music. And I feel that I learn every time more. And so it's beautiful to listen what the others are. Yeah. After all, we are simply translating with our keys and our knobs, something that is already written in the cosmos. We're transcribing them down with these instruments.
Yeah,
it's already written.
It's interesting how that perception has kind of deteriorated from modern science, because if you look at the history of science, all of the original astronomers were obsessed with this idea that music came from the cosmos, and they were seeing, because you see these same resonances in the solar system and in different gravitational interactions that are stable reproductions of the tones we have and that we use to build music out of. And people used to just see this everywhere. They were absolutely, the Greeks are a great example, but even into the Enlightenment thinkers, people were just absolutely sure that music held the key to the cosmos. And you don't really see that so much among scientists these days, and I feel like that's tragic.
I think that quantum field theory is a rebirth of that mindset. Because I think that it's a resonant field that stretches through everything, and everything is a part of it, and it's very ethereal, and it's very harmonic.
And there is something to this idea that, like, when you're creating music, you just feel like when you're completely in the zone, it's just kind of coming through you, right? It's not like it's more like you're discovering something than creating it, right? You're not engineering that moment always. It sometimes just comes through. I would say some of the best ideas, like, you have to go back and refine them and, make them presentable, but the melodies come through you to some extent, like an antenna.
Absolutely, I agree. I completely agree. There are some magic moments that you don't prepare them; they simply come when you find a very particular sound that resonates with your soul. Practically, all of a sudden, it's like if the hands start to move by themselves on the keys. Something like if you are guided, like if you are I've been doing windsurf when I was young, like to surf on the waves. Yeah. And then when you learn to stand up on the board, and then you go with it, and especially if you make sequences or something, it's something like magic. If you try to reproduce, because then you want to do that better, to write it, it will never come the same. At least I speak from my experience.
Yeah, man, it's like one of the closest things to supernatural experience that I can relate to is just the experience of having a musical idea, and I imagine like having a scientific breakthrough is kind of similar, right? Where the world has just prepared this, sea of evidence, and you've just kind of come into like an awakening, right? It's a very similar process. That's kind of one of the most inexplicable pieces of consciousness, is our ability to pull these patterns out of just a sea of chaos.
To have an idea.
What is it like? What is having an idea? It's such a wild concept to really try to put your finger on. Yeah.
Do you have a sense for where ideas come from?
Yes, I do. I've written a book which is very strange. It is in 2015. It's a only speculative book, so it's something that is not ground to earth like the work I normally do, but it's speculative about the nature of consciousness or something. I had thought about a model of consciousness in which practically the universe works like a supercomputer, non-local supercomputer, where the bits are the up and down part of the quantum foam, practically, of you have up and down. It's like a wave, the quantum foam, and then you use the up and down part to modulate like bits, and you memorize everything inside the quantum vacuum, and namely something that is between the electron and the nucleus in the atom. In the quantum vacuum, you have a supercomputer that memorize everything that is coming from our mind. Every time we do something or think something, we upload this thing on this quantum computer, as well as we can download this kind of information. And I think that downloading is a result of some scientists like Nikola Tesla or like Leonardo, who are geniuses. The secret of geniality consists in how brave, how sensitive, how powerful is your non-local antenna in downloading a kind of information that is being put there by other beings, and you don't realize, and it comes inside you through the shape of images, and these images are not the information itself, but they are there to trigger some process in your brain. It's something like when you click on an icon of a software, you click twice and you activate the software. They said it's something like a computer, a non-local computer. So I wrote this book, which name is the hyperspace, the hyperspace of consciousness, that now is only in ebook version, but it was published also on paper. So
that sounds cool. Yeah, we'll put a link. Is it published? People can find it.
Yes.
Okay.
It is the Massimo Teodorani, the Hyperspace of Consciousness, Buzzwords Books Australia. So they can find the ebook version there.
Very
but
cool.
It was published in Sweden as a paper book, but it's not anymore in press. And so, unfortunately. So it's a mad book. It's completely mad because sometimes I like to do these things.
I mean, even from a information perspective, I think that works analogously too, right? In that there's a mimetic heredity to being a human, where ideas are passed around, and the society why is calculus discovered twice at the same time? Why is the inverse square law discovered by lots of people at the same time? And it's almost like the information sea is productive enough. The foam is there for people to pluck these ideas out.
Yes. And beyond that, I think that each generation is made aware of these ideas foundationally. And so children that are born in a world that has these ideas already codified develop differently than those that were born before somebody put those ideas into place. And so you see this intergenerational cultural transmission of knowledge where the basis of how we have ideas changes over time.
It's true.
And something else about this is that it's almost this kind of antenna process by which, there's something that you tune into and you're able to download it or to upload. And I think that resonance requires stillness. And we live in a time where it feels like ideas are kind of stuck sometimes. There's a paper that came out in Nature just recently where they were talking about the gradual decrease in innovation in patents and papers. And what they basically did is they codified it by saying that, okay, so a truly disruptive idea is one that doesn't cite the preceding literature, but is then cited going forward. And so how many papers do you have that aren't referencing things that came before, but are then referenced repeatedly afterwards? And they basically, it's an exponential decay curve for both patents and papers. And there's a lot of people that are like, it has to do with peer review, and they're kicking at the structure of the machine. But I also think that it has to do with the elimination of boredom from the world. Where when you sit alone in a room and you don't have visual stimulus and you don't have something that's constantly pinging and asking for you, the phone's not ringing, and you're able to find stillness, that's where ideas
That's like the only time I ever have ideas is out in the woods, actually. I'm completely devoid of ideas any other time.
Me too. Me too, the same. I'm walking on the wood, especially when I go mushrooming or now we have a lot of snow here, walking in the wood with the snow. I completely agree. And I noticed that you have to make the void inside your mind to get this, to allow this flow occur, and to make the total void completely.
Mm,
And then images are coming because it's something incredible. Before falling asleep, I think you also have experienced these hypnagogic images that are coming, which are high resolution, color. It's not a dream, it's something real. It's like you see in television, and you participate in that. It's fantastic. It's
I think that in the future we will have every house will have a Faraday cage room. Like I think that it's
assuming the prices of copper go down.
well. Do you have to have copper for a Faraday cage, or can you make a Faraday cage from other metals?
I don't
Something
know.
conductive, I guess.
Yeah. Well, because I mean, I think that there is, if you are suffused constantly with modernity and people live in the cities and they cannot get somewhere in nature, and the best thing that they have is just a quiet room in their house, you have to have a place where nothing can disturb you. And it's not because you've put your phone on silent and necessarily put it away, but it's literally a place that you go that is meant to be undisturbed. And we don't have that in the world very much.
Especially in the cities.
Especially in the cities. And there doesn't seem to be a reversal of the flow towards the cities, right? I think that predictions that by 2050, 90% of the world's population is going to live in cities. And so you wonder what's going to happen to the ability to have these transcendent ideas, these paradigm shifts where all of a sudden everything snaps into place. And for me, I think that the only way that I can imagine that is these chambers where people can go that are enforced quiet, that are separated from the world. But
we would need that also, not only if we live in the cities, but also if we live in nature, because sometimes there are places like fault lines that produce a lot of radio radiation in the VHF, ELF, VLF. It's due to the rocks that are crashing together. Underground quartz, for instance, is crashing, especially during seisms. And also nature is producing this electromagnetic radiation, and also the atmosphere, of course. So yes, as you said, it would be nice to have a, vacuum chamber where to stay 1 hour every day, maybe inside water, because I was told by my wife that water is very conducive of certain phenomena.
And it's very difficult for low energy electromagnetic radiation, like essentially radio waves don't get into water very well, right? It absorbs very heavily in the microwave. You can't use a radio underwater, obviously.
Yeah.
So that's an interesting insulating property of it too. Man, yeah. Now I just want to go in the woods.
yeah, it's we technically we live in nature, but we are probably we're kind of in a rural area. But in order to get away from the easily accessible, I don't know if this is a problem in Italy, but people out here when they go in the woods, they leave a lot of garbage. And so, especially around the towns, there's areas where you go that are shooting ranges where there's like busted up televisions and washing machines, and like people just bring stuff out to target practice.
That's very bad.
It's horrifying. But you can go far enough away, but it takes about an hour to get there. And our lives are just such that we don't have time every week to do it. And so we're at like week 2 of urban living, and I think we're both
we need
starting
some house plants.
We're both starting to come apart at the seams a little bit.
So what's next for you? Are you pursuing these UAP scanners heavily? Is that kind of where the focus of your work is right now, or what's coming up next that we can look forward to from your hand?
Yeah. Some things. For now, I'm doing calculations to optimize this spectrograph, the optimum resolution, optimum type to obtain good data with the Galileo project, but not only with the Galileo project, because I started again a collaboration with Project Hessdalen in Norway. They have to refurbish one of the 2 observatories. So they asked my help for doing that. And I have a book with my wife, who is a parapsychologist. She's Canadian, and she lives with me here in North Italy. The book is about a possible, this is speculative, theory about a scientific theory, an attempt of scientific theory about life after death.
Whoa.
With no need of a God. There is no need of a God for a biological or biophysical process. So we have developed this thing. We are now looking again the manuscript, and I think in 2 or 3 months we will submit it. It's another mad book. Then what else? I will continue to play probably. I will probably buy a new synth. I have to decide which. Maybe the Quantum. If I am completely mad, I will buy the Quantum from Waldorf, but I don't know. I will see. It will end up with a model electronics, $600.
It gets worse than that.
Yeah. Yes. Yeah. And then there are some books. Instead, these are very ground basis. There is a book about particle physics that I published 15 years ago for students, and as a manual, seen from the perspective of an astrophysicist, which I have to update, especially after the discovery of the Higgs boson, to make a new edition. So I have to work on that book again. Yes, several things. Other things, probably I'm going to do other things, but I'm losing neurons, like the losing neurons, like the glass balls, that fall everywhere along the road. I'm forgetting things, but there is also something else that I have to do, but I now don't remember. Maybe because it's late in the night, I'm old, and
I mean, it's always good when you know that there's always more things to be done. I think that's one of the most reassuring things about being alive is just having an endless list of projects that you have set out before you. I think that's actually probably one of the keys to healthy aging in general, is just always having something.
This is going on, and I'm happy with that. I have also a very stimulating wife in this sense, intellectually, and I'm very happy with that. We have a lot of nature around here. 2 cats that one is sleeping near the chair here. And so, yes, we are quite happy. Life is interesting.
Yeah.
That's wonderful. It's been fascinating talking to you.
Yeah.
For me too.
Really fun to meet you.
Thank you so much for your questions, for your patience, and for having me with you here.
Yeah. And I really want to keep an eye on your work and see how this pans out with the UAP scanners. And yeah, I'd love to see that become a readily available technology that people could implement to themselves. Because it seems like scanning the sky is quite a large task. It's a big area.
And humans have always been fascinated by it too.
Yeah, people would be into it.
Yeah, definitely.
So yeah, thanks for coming by, man. It's been really fun to meet you.
Thank you so much. You will put this recording on your website, I guess.
Yeah. Well, it'll be at all the podcast places, and we'll put it up on YouTube, and yeah, we'll send you links once it's published. And yeah.
Thank you very much.
Yeah.
It was a great pleasure to have you, and I wish you a very nice weekend.